right now, so that we can send it out as a resource afterwards. So as much content as we can out of the chat function, we will share in that follow-up email as well as the recording. All right, and then quick agenda. Again, this is meant to be totally discussion. If we take it somewhere else from what our original questions are, that's absolutely fine. And then we've left the last few minutes of the meeting to be just a total general discussion Q&A. The topics do not have to be what we have outlined to discuss here. If we're having a great conversation and we want to continue with that, we will. If not, we can switch over to different topics. All right. Oh, another housekeeping thing. Seems like everyone's doing this and we're all super used to Zoom at this point, but please mute yourself unless you're speaking, and then just unmute when you want to add to the discussion. Awesome. So just super generally, what is your organization doing? I don't mind kicking off the discussion. I can tell you what the Ackland Art Museum is doing. We are planning to make a plan. We are, of course, part of the University of North Carolina. We've received some guidance from them, but we are pretty much on our own to determine what our plan is. So I have to admit, we are planning to make a plan. We do not have a plan yet. We are still in the resource gathering phase of things. So what are you guys doing?
I'll go. For those of you who might not know me, I'm Jamie Backover. I am the Senior Event Coordinator at Marbles Kids Museum. And Dylan, we are pretty much in our events world, our events team. We are pretty much in the same realm. There's no set guideline that we're really walking into. There's still no set dates as far as Marbles reopening, as far as even our team being able to host events. You know, still, of course, working within the guidelines and trying to figure out what that necessarily means, and still not necessarily knowing what the future in different phases could mean, but just trying to have a plan for when we do hit that go button. We are somewhat prepared for what that new realm will be.
Has anyone started with any specifics? I know we've been talking about things like face masks a lot. Would anyone be willing to share if their group has made any specific decisions about logistical things, face masks, how many sanitation stations you're having, how are you encouraging distancing, are you using shields in front of your ticketing booths, things like that?
I can chime in. Can you guys hear me? I'm from the North Carolina Museum of Art. And so, you know, we're a state agency, so I think we had to be a lot more, maybe more diligent. And we take guidance from the Department of Health and Human Services, but we are requiring staff can't enter the building unless they have a mask on, and staff have to wear masks around the public and other people at all times. But then for the visitors at this point, we're only suggesting masks. But yeah, I'm wondering, I can ask my supervisor after this. We have like a 3-page spreadsheet of all our reopening procedures and new guidelines, and one-way traffic flows. We'll have shields at every like visitor desk, and then the bathrooms will be like there'll be stalls closed. Only a certain number of people can use the bathroom at a certain point. Yeah, so I'm not sure. That's just kind of the overview. But the thing about the masks, I feel really good about myself since I live with someone who's immunocompromised. So I think the staff are definitely going to need to be all on board with like the strictest protocols. That's where we're at. But we don't know when we'll open, so that's, you know, mystery.
I'm happy to chime in. We've got a few people from the Museum of Life and Science on here. But we have started a plan, and hopefully that will be shared to our staff over the next week or so. But at the moment, our staff are required to wear masks if social distancing is not a possibility. We are also asking all of our employees, contractors, anyone working on site to take their temperature ahead of coming on site, and then letting us know if it's acceptable. Not necessarily saying here's what my temperature is, but knowing that we don't want anyone on site who has a temperature of over 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. There's been a lot of different changes at the Museum of Life and Science, but we are changing a little bit of our visitor entry experience to encourage that different groups go through different entry points and things like that. I don't know what all has been officially confirmed for when we do reopen, but we are looking at potentially phasing our reopening, maybe doing time ticketing. There's a whole lot of different things kind of floating around, and nothing official has been shared with everyone yet. And then as far as events, our private events team functions a little bit differently than our public events team. But we're working on a private events team reopening as well. And I'm not sure, Emily, if you guys have talked about how you guys will operate as a public events crew, but we're looking at potentially phasing our reopening for private rentals as well.
I just want to kind of piggyback off of Lauren a little bit. Being a museum that is predominantly children, those are very similar kind of discussions that we're trying to figure out. I think I'm like 90% sure, don't quote me on this, but the whole mask thing, I think it has to be suggestive. I don't think that it's something that necessarily we can mandate just because of health reasons. And of course, with children, it's a line of, requiring children to wear masks. And even the kind of discussions that I've been hearing as far as reopening with our staff wearing masks. Of course, if that's right now, that's what we're doing when we're closed. And Samantha Kate has been on campus as well, and just kind of very similar as far as the temperatures. She was saying our 100 is our kind of line. And so I think that will change kind of different organizations within. But it's a question of being a children's museum, how inviting will it be if all of our staff are wearing masks and you can only see your eyes, and kind of just those similar elements I'm sure everybody has been thinking of. And we're kind of right there with you with a lot of ideas floating around, and still nothing has been like, this is our plane moving. So, I mean, it's really, I'm glad that we're able to kind of discuss and kind of hear what everybody else is not necessarily pinned down, but still kind of thinking, and it makes me feel good that we're somewhat on a similar track.
I will also say our HR team has made it very clear that if anyone is feeling ill at all, they're not to come on campus, or they're going to be going home. Like, even if that's for a headache, nausea, any type of anything other than feeling 100% yourself, we're encouraging people not to come on campus as well.
I can speak a bit to Moorhead Planetarium's plans. This is Richard. I'm the reservations person at the planetarium. We also are still in the process of planning to make a plan. Our staff's been kind of divided into groups to come up with ideas and strategies for when we reopen. And while we haven't pinned down a lot of things, we have talked about all staff being required to have masks, whether we're open to the public yet or not. And we're talking about things for how we flow folks through the building. We're going to have a one-way flow, so everyone enters in one place and exits to another place, so they aren't passing each other. Limiting the capacity of our theater, but having only certain seats available for folks to sit in, and removing certain exhibits that are more interactive so that folks aren't touching things in the exhibits. And probably the biggest thing that I know that we talked about a lot last week, and our team's discussion was having special hours for different types of groups. Like when we have school groups in the building, we're closed to the general public. It's just school groups. And then once the groups leave, we clean, and then we open up to the general public. So having structured hours for different types of constituents that are entering the building. For events specifically, we haven't really talked about that yet. I think the main concern is focusing on the general public and school groups at the moment. But we haven't talked about event specific procedures yet on our end.
Has anyone had discussions or made concrete timelines about how far in advance you're bringing your staff back on site before you do open up to the public? Are those things that go hand in hand for you? Is it clear that you're bringing back staff before you bring back the public, but the timeline isn't clear? Any input on that would be, I think, interesting.
I can speak a bit to that. I work over at the North Carolina Botanical Garden, so we're kind of in the same realm where we kind of have a plan, but we're kind of waiting on UNC's officials to, approve those plans. So right now we've had staff members on site for the past 10 or so weeks, however long we've been doing this, just like the essential horticulturists, maintaining the plants and whatnot. So our proposed timeline, which again has not been approved by the university, over the next couple of weeks, staff members are going to prepare to start coming back. And then our phase 1, we are saying, is June 16th through July 27th. So it'd be a 6-week period where all of our buildings are closed and essential staff members are starting to come back. So in that plan, we have all of our staff members kind of assigned even to different bathrooms and different entrances to the garden. And that's both getting on site and getting into buildings. Everyone's assigned a different door, essentially, to come in. And then our phase 2 will begin, we hope, July 28th, and that'll run through August 24th. So that's a 4-week period. And we're kind of debating whether or not to do like a limited entry where we kind of test the waters per se with maybe our membership or smaller groups. We don't know if we want to open it up right to the public immediately because we don't really know what our capacity is going to be. So that 4-week phase, we're hoping to open up the buildings more, but again, like Moorhead, we'll close off all of our interactive exhibits. Anything that encourages touching, we're not going to have open. A lot of our educational materials for children will also be, seems to be off limits, unfortunately. And likewise, we're encouraging our staff members to wear masks. We can't mandate that our visitors do it. There's been a lot of concern among staff members, like how are we going to enforce this if we have to tell people that they have to wear masks? And it's just seeming like we're not going to require anyone to do it. So that's about all we have planned at this point.
I know we have started bringing some people back on campus now in preparation for a reopening at some point in the hopefully near future. And I know M is leading kind of one of those teams, but they're doing a lot of special projects on campus, cleaning buildings, things like that. But most of our staff are encouraged to work from home for as long as possible or until that policy changes. So I manage the private rentals team, and so my team will likely be working from home until what I'm considering is about 2 weeks before the museum starts reopening, so that we can kind of help with that, those final phases on that.
I just wanted to touch or highlight a little bit. And again, I preface this with, this is not, my team is not necessarily the one deciding this, but these are just kind of some things that we've been hearing as far as reentry for the public, being a museum full of exhibits where children touch everything and very, immersed in that realm. Some of the things that we've been floating are maybe members only as well, which David, you kind of that we're talking about, and then having either timed entrances, limiting how many people, but also we've discussed closing down some exhibits at certain times of the day. So say 3 of our exhibits on the first floor are open and the other ones are being cleaned and presently cleaned. So while it makes our guests feel like, okay, good, they're making sure that they're cleaning everything and having that presence, and then rotating the ones that were being cleaned at a different time so we can clean the ones that they were having open. So definitely a unique situation being such a hands-on experience.
Those of you who have started to create cleaning plans, who is responsible for implementing those? Do you have a housekeeping team and it's exclusively their job? Or are you finding that the cleaning is such a big job that you're having your other team members who are not usually responsible for cleaning pitch in and take part in that schedule? And also, how are you documenting those things?
This is Jennifer Sandoval from the Gregg Museum of Art and Design, and we actually do have a housekeeping team that is responsible for the entire university, and they also come to the Gregg Museum on a regular schedule. At this point, we're actually trying to touch bases with them and see what the new schedule might be, but we are actually thinking that our staff, especially visitor services, will be responsible too for cleaning in between visits if we decide to have time ticketing, for instance, and possibly allow a little bit of wiggle room in between each time that the visitors are coming in to do that cleaning part, and getting ready for the next group to come in. So we're really not sure how that's going to work out, and we haven't reopened yet, but that's something that we're actually thinking about.
And this, I'll jump in too. Can y'all hear me? This is Hillary at the Gregg as well. And Dylan, something that you were asking about was when staff are coming back. And that's something that we don't have a clear answer on yet. But something, since we don't have that, I'm trying to think of what I can control. And so for me, I'm trying to come up with the milestones that we'll need to hit in my mind before we can open to the public. So knowing we're going to have to work with facility staff for installing like the plexiglass barrier at our front desk. There's other areas in the building that we want that kind of thing, but I think we're focusing on those front of house areas first. Then we're making sure we're finalizing our cleaning schedule, for instance. There's just and signage. That's another thing that I'm kind of curious to hear others talk about, how aggressive you're going to be with your signs, because we're already starting to get pushback from our director about, hey, that's too many signs that are on our initial draft list of what we would like. And then curious if others are using floor stickers or if you're using things on the wall or just standalone signs. That's something we're going back and forth with, especially if we're only going to be able to use a limited amount. What are the key areas that others might be looking at? But if others have ideas about the milestones, I think my biggest fear with this is that the university, since we're part of NC State, that they're going to say, okay, all facilities are back open, and we're going to have to say, wait, we're not ready. And if that's for some small reason, such as not having a hand sanitizer, then I just want to figure out more so what those musts are. And some of that, I haven't been allowed back in the building yet. So I really want to be back in there because I can do all the planning I want, but being in the space is so different to plan. So I really, truly hope, like David was saying earlier, that there's going to be weeks that the staff are on site before we open to the public. So fingers crossed, but it's hard. It's good and bad being a part of a university because we feel a little bit like we can make some decisions, but then we can't make other ones because we have to rely on what the university is telling us. So.
Has anyone? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so to kind of answer a little bit about signage, I think we tend to take the stance that there's never too much signage, at least from what I see. We know that our visitors, and a lot of times, like my team, our clients don't tend to read emails or things sent to them in advance. So as much signage as possible on the day of that they're there is the best. But nothing's been fully decided for us at the Museum of Life and Science, but I know there are talks of having social distancing demarcations, welcome signage. There's talks of sending that in advance to our members, making sure that that's clear on our website, and trying to get that message out as early as possible. And especially, I know my team, we're working on that as well for our clients to try and get them as much information on the front end as we can to minimize the issues on the back end.
At the art museum, we're just using, from what I understand now, I'm not involved in the reopening operations per se, but they're using gaff tape everywhere because they're anticipating a lot of impermanence with demarcation and having to label things. So we talked a lot about more permanent signage, or making maybe our usual fancier branded type stuff, but we realized that it's probably going to be real dynamic and ever changing. So apparently they were out a few weeks ago testing all different types of tape in weather and rain to see what stuff belongs. Yeah, I think we're going more with just tape, and I'm not even sure we'll have signage, especially because people might not read it. I'm not sure. But tape was our answer for a lot of it.
Another question I have for folks is something we've been talking about is furniture. And are we completely removing it? Are we having it and just social distancing it? Are we having it in the galleries or only in the lobby? Because one thing we were talking about yesterday is if we have it in the lobby, then it might be easier to have wipes available for folks if that makes them feel better to clean it themselves in addition to the cleaning that we're doing. Whereas if we keep the benches that we have throughout the gallery spaces, then that we're not going to want the visitors to be doing any cleaning in those spaces, of course. So just trying to think through options. We also recently acquired some gallery stools that we have. So we've talked about having those available as an option. That way people have their own stool perhaps. But just curious what others are doing in that area.
I was just starting to read before this meeting some of the CDC and OSHA guidelines, which I will link and send out afterwards. And they have specific requirements about cleaning. But the thing I know in our museum, we have soft seating, we have couches and things like that, which is a whole nother situation with cleaning. So I hadn't gotten to the section that told me how to clean those surfaces, but it is out there. And I know for us, there is also the consideration of removing the soft surfaces potentially from the hard ones, maybe leaving the stools, but removing the couches. So those are things that we are starting to consider. And especially depending on what the cleaning guidelines are for those soft surfaces, it might be a very long time before we put those back out. But I think that's such a great point and consideration. And I'd be really interested to hear what others are doing with those types of things.
We don't necessarily have the furniture-wise element, but I did want to give you guys a resource as well, and I'm sure you might have heard of this, and it's more geared towards restaurants, but there's a lot of relative information, especially at revolving events, that could be helpful, and that's Count on Me NC, and they've got a lot of guides that you can sift through, and it's essentially like a little test that you get and you kind of get like a little certification, but that's something that we are most likely going to have at least our event staff kind of make sure they take and to give them a little bit of more information, make them feel comfortable, but also something that will make hopefully our clients feel a little bit more comfortable as well.
I'm curious, this is again Jenny from the Gregg Museum, and I'm curious if anyone is planning to do, and you might have talked about this in the beginning, but I kind of came a little bit later, about what groups are you possibly assigning not only just the time ticketing, but are you allowing, for instance, members in beforehand, or certain groups, like maybe somebody that is more at risk during certain times? Is anybody planning on doing some type of soft reopening with members?
We've definitely considered that at the garden. We've considered allowing our members to enter first, and then since we also had to cancel all of our summer camps this year, we're thinking about maybe allowing those families to come in and maybe doing some type of special event, since we do have their contact information still. That's about as far as we've gone for planning that, but I do think a soft opening is in our future.
I would say that's also something that has been floating around the Museum of Life and Science, that we are considering that, but nothing's been kind of finalized yet. And what that would look like, if it would be a couple of days of doing that, a few weeks, if that would be a month, and then also what benchmarks we would have to meet to open up to the general public and pay general admission as well.
Before I ask another question, does anyone else have anything to say on soft openings or times? I guess I will jump back. Someone mentioned that they were doing restricted times for at-risk or members. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was. Could you share specifically what your plans are for that, if you have them? Is that something that's happening in the mornings, afternoons, how you made those decisions, things like that?
Hey, Dylan, I think it was from whoever was with the Moorhead Planetarium. I don't remember who exactly that is, though.
That's me. We didn't actually decide that, but that's something we did discuss. Specifically, we talked about not so much members, but school groups versus general public for whenever we open in the fall. School groups being almost exclusively morning visitors, and then general public more in the afternoons and weekends. We haven't gotten much further beyond that, and it's kind of just in the starting phase of that. We don't know what times we're going to choose or how we're going to figure that out. We are planning to survey our schools that have come in the past, and different teachers and school districts, to get an idea of what their plans are for the fall, to see if they're even able to visit, and then get their input on what would work for them. Something that we also discussed in one of our group meetings last week was the idea of, do we limit only one school to a show, whereas before multiple schools could see the same show, because one of the CDC guidelines on schools traveling is that they only interact with groups from their school and that kind of thing, or they stick to their class. So if we were able to do that for them, would that encourage them to visit, and see how we could do that? So we've looked into the specifics of how that could work, but we haven't actually decided on how we would accomplish that just yet.
Totally understandable. I know we are all in these sound like good ideas phase, but how to implement them. Is anyone, I know NCMA, we're talking about signage on the floor, and we also love gaff tape in our building and use it all the time. Something we had been discussing is if we should create a one-way flow of traffic, and so sort of how people view the exhibitions. At least in our museum, we have a general outline of how we would suggest people view, but really people are open to flow through the museum in whatever direction they choose. Has anyone started to implement a pathway for guests, and are you using anything other than gaff tape to mark that for your guests?
Yeah, the art museum will definitely have a one-way flow, and I think the biggest I hate to use the word enforce. The biggest way to contain that is actually going to be on our security guards and maybe visitor services and maybe other staff if it ends up needing support. So yeah, labeling with tape. And I mean, we're also doing timed ticketing, even for our free collection, though that we have, just a certain number of people in the building at any time. But yeah, we've been told that if folks start to kind of try to turn around or go away from that flow, then we'll just gently, politely ask them to follow the tape and go with that flow. I think marketing is going to be doing a lot of sharing out and posting and managing expectations before people even get on campus. I mean, I think we'll all probably be trying to do that for folks who are, in the know and following us and getting emails. But hopefully that helps prepare them for their visit before they even get here and then figure out, oh my God, I can only go one direction, kind of things. I think in our building, I think there are a few places where you can like pop off that train, right? So you can go one way, and if you're like, I don't want to go through the whole museum, you can still leave in that same direction. But yeah, that's the plan.
At the Gregg Museum, we have talked about perhaps assigning just our main door as an entrance, and we do have a terrace door, a couple of terrace doors and a door that comes out to the garden from the historic house. So that will be our designated exit. So it wouldn't be like we were before, where anyone can enter and exit through some of those main doors at the same time. But we were thinking about using some kind of either vinyl or decals on the floor, whether it be arrows or footsteps, whatever that might be, to kind of guide visitors through the gallery, especially because some of our galleries are very tight and small and wouldn't necessarily fit too many people going both ways, or there wouldn't be enough room in between the artwork. So definitely thinking about some sort of path, a suggested path for them to follow. And this is just a thought, but maybe perhaps providing the visitor with a map of the place prior to their visit. So if there is a time ticket, for instance, then they could be either download a map or print a map that we can provide to them prior to them coming into the space.
That's a great idea. I know we have been talking a lot about what to do with our resources that people hold and not wanting to put a bunch of paper out there that has to be recycled and things like that. I have a question that I think might be a little bit specific to us, but I know there's a lot of museums on this call, and a lot of us are tied to bigger entities like a university, or I know NCMA, you guys are tied closely to the state. Currently, restrictions for the state and in Durham, which is where I live, not where I work, specifically reference that museums are not to be opened during this time. Are you all receiving guidance from anyone else about what exactly those restrictions, when they might be changed? Or really what I'm interested in is which entity that we're a part of has the call about that. I know that, Greg, you guys were talking about if the university decides to open up your facilities, are you guys expected to open up then? Well, if the state's restrictions say that museums should be closed, but the university opens, does anyone have any ideas or receiving any guidance on that type of thing?
This is Hillary from the Gregg. That's definitely something that I'm most curious about too. I think right now we're in phase 2 with the governor, so we're sort of thinking that maybe by early July that staff might be back. And NC State has announced that August 10th is the new earlier date for classes to start. So that's also kind of in my mind, as maybe that's also something that we would be aiming for a potential early opening date. I'm really truly hoping that this opening is a lot different than how the closing went down, because for us, the closing went down in a way that I didn't agree with. We wanted to close, and then the university said, wait, you can't close. And then like 24 hours later, they said, oh, we're closing, so you can close too. So I trust that this experience has made our administrators above us a little bit more vocal, and that they'll be sort of telling the folks above them some of their art-specific concerns related to reopening. I know I don't know if there's any theater folks on this call, but for example, we're a part of Arts NC State, and which includes University Theater. And University Theater is thinking that some of their theater space is going to be overtaken as a new social distancing classroom. So that's a concern. So then meanwhile, they're also reaching out to us at the museum to say, hey, can we use your garden for performances? And we're like, well, wait a minute. We don't even know exactly what our needs are, and we're working on that. So we're kind of having pressure in all new ways to be available and a resource and just a facility in general. So there's lots of things to navigate on that front, but that would also impact our calendar, I'd imagine, Dylan. But I wish I knew that answer, but I'm certainly being a strong advocate for making sure that we're not truly going to open until we're really ready, because there's a lot that we have to do to protect our staff and our visitors for sure. So.
Hey, this is Carrie Woke at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So just like we're in the same boat as the Art Museum. So if the governor moves into phase 3, then I think we're expected to open. And that's at the end of June. And so that we are planning on June 27th as our open date. So we are following the state's guidelines.
Out of curiosity, with the state's guidelines, is it that people are planning to follow like phase 3 museums can open, or are people planning to follow certain gathering restrictions? I know I've spoken with my boss about, if we can't have more than 50 or 100 people on campus, we're not quite sure how that would work or look. And I was curious to see if anybody else has talked about that as well.
I think we're planning on doing, we're a free museum. So I think we're planning on doing tickets, so time tickets to maintain, I think I might be wrong, but is it 25% capacity? So you determine that number and you sell for free the tickets that to get to that number. I've talked to a lot of other museums like across the country that have already opened, and a lot of them are saying they're not even reaching that capacity, like people just aren't coming.
Can I jump in and ask you, do you know what ticketing software you're planning to use for your free tickets?
That's a good question. I don't know if my coworker who actually knows that is on the call. I'm looking really quickly. We use Alltrue. That's what we do for like our, the things we do sell tickets for. So I would imagine we would use that because we already have that in place.
I will also say that again, so many of us on this call are museum folks. So we do hope to have another discussion specifically about public programs and groups and things like that, which is absolutely appropriate to talk about here as well. But we understand that there are also event professionals and other types of people on this call. So we were going to schedule another one as well for that. So we have about 20 minutes left. Do we have any other questions? I mean, I guess we'll just move into sort of general Q&A here too. So questions about really anything at this point, please feel free to ask.
This is Jenny with the Gregg Museum, and I'm wondering, what is anyone doing about restrooms? Are they closing restrooms? Are they limiting capacity? How are you really working around that and making sure that there's not you're not reaching a high capacity of people within your restrooms if you have several stalls?
This is Richard at Moorhead Planetarium. We haven't decided anything, of course, but in one of our group discussions, we talked about that as well. Specifically, we have a couple restrooms downstairs that are decent capacity, but it's in a very narrow, small hallway. And when school groups are present, it can become quite crowded. So we talked about the potential of, do we have porta potties we put outside that are for, whenever it is a bit more crowded, that get emptied regularly, and that kind of thing. I mean, that was just an idea. We hadn't really discussed a whole lot beyond that. Um, we're open to the public, and it's just general public that's in the spaces. I think that when we're looking at the flow of folks in the building and capacity of how many folks we're letting in at any given time, we'll, the bathrooms will be certainly a factor in that, in terms of how many people we try to let in a space at a time. The good news for us is the spaces that are more publicly accessible for restrooms are smaller capacity restrooms, so we won't have as big a crowds in there at a time. But that's something we're certainly factoring in, but we haven't quite made some decisions about that.
I know in some of the discussions, the Museum of Life and Science has upgraded all of our restrooms to have hands-free sinks, hands-free soap dispensers, paper towels. We might have been a little bit behind other organizations and getting that taken care of, but they've also talked about potentially leaving doors opened and just having frequent cleaning services go through. So we do contract out our cleaning, kind of back to the cleaning question, Dylan, you had earlier. And I would anticipate that more than likely our guest services staff and our exhibit staff and our facilities staff will all be kind of pitching in to help with cleanings where needed. So we try to take that, we're all part of this organization and we need to all contribute in a way that's productive. So if people need things, jump in and help. But I don't know if there's been any talk about monitoring the number of people who are in restrooms. Personally, I think that becomes a little sticky of a situation, because then you're telling people they have to go to another restroom or they're not allowed in that one. And a lot of times we try to provide people just that opportunity to do those things, but whether they choose to do them or not is kind of their own personal opinion and choice. So I'm not sure if that's the way that the museum will go with restrooms, but I haven't heard any discussion on whether or not we'll have somebody standing there monitoring how many people go into a bathroom or not.
I asked a question in the chat. I'm from the Museum of Life and Science, fundraising events manager, so I do the public events. And Dylan just answered me. Thank you. The question is, as far as large events are concerned, have any organizations begun the discussion or planning on how to enforce social distancing? And as far as timelines concerned, have any organizations given any idea of a green light as far as when they'll be able to start putting them back on?
So at the Museum of Natural Sciences, we have a calendar of large public events. We have Bugfest in September. It gets about 30,000 people. And we have an event in October and another one in November. So we've already decided to move all those events onto an online format. And then we're going to assess our spring events. So we have Astronomy Days in January, we have a February, a March, and an April. These are big thousands of people events. We're going to assess those in September and see how we feel about it, and make a decision at that point.
At the Ackland, we have canceled all of our private events. So what we call a private event is a contract with a outside host. We have canceled all of those through September. And I may be advising that we cancel through October as well. But for us personally, we have, it's a completely separate department for our public programs. And then what we call Ackland events. So things that we host are still things that we're having conversations about. We don't have any, we have recently decided we don't have any Ackland events scheduled through September. So October is really our month right now that we're still unsure about.
Curious, Dylan, with you guys making a hard line and not that far out, but like not knowing what we necessarily could or couldn't be doing at that point. Have you been getting any pushback from your clients? Are you just automatically, because you're canceling, giving them their refund? And then just curious, like what maybe your wording through your cancellation form maybe might be, or anything like that, given that element?
Yeah, I'm happy to share what I have done so far. I actually was just starting to get to the point this week of reaching out to clients to specifically cancel, only to have them cancel on me first. So that was easy. We are fortunate that a lot of our business is through the university. So their other university units, they are, you know, under the same guidelines we are. So I'm a little bit lucky in that sense. We do have some private events on the books that I've had to deal with, but again, I've just gotten lucky that those people are canceling. I have personally seen in my event leads that they are starting to pick up in November. So it's been, again, I've just sort of been lucky. I haven't had to deal with the month of October so much because I haven't seen interest there, which I think says a lot about the public's comfort level as well. But I'm happy to share, we just put up, as of yesterday, a very brief statement about canceling events through September, and I'm happy to share that verbiage in an email.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful. We are in the same kind of boat where people are naturally either pushing their events or if they are within the ordinance time frame where they just aren't allowed to have their event, we of course are honoring their refund, but kind of deciding if we need to have any addendums to our contracting that have specific verbiage or almost like an outlined kind of date structure of if you cancel between these times, this is what your refund policy. So curious if any of you all have that, that'd be awesome if you could share that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something we'll also touch base a little bit on tomorrow in the private events, is talking about contracts, because they are so different. I know this is something I spoke with my boss about yesterday, is how do you add in you know, an addendum to a contract, but that doesn't cover all of the guests who come on site? Do you have a general policy? So that's definitely something we're going to talk about tomorrow as well in the private events chat.
To move on a little bit from that, my question's kind of micro, and it's probably just me worrying for nothing, but I'm thinking as capacity increases, you know, when we first open, capacity will be low, so I don't think it'll be a problem, but I'm wondering if others are thinking about possibly identifying family units at museums. You know, a family unit doesn't always walk together in a gallery space, they split up. If we have changing shifts and new visitor services folks, they may not be able to know, oh, someone's too close or not. Oh, they're just in the same family. So to sort of help prevent any sort of awkwardness or just anything like that, just curious if others have been thinking through something like that.
We have not considered that. That is such a good point that I think we need to add to our discussion. Off the top of my head, I have no idea how we would manage that, but it's a very good point.
Yeah, I've seen other folks also do it. We're all on the same floor, but for others that are larger, they're limiting like elevator usage to one family unit. So that's another kind of a term that might be starting to be familiar with museums. So if we have the same language, if a family unit is the right verbiage, I was curious if others have heard other things, but on some of these webinars that we've been doing or attending rather from international folks already reopening, that was what they sort of started to use. But I thought it was interesting at NC State, they're starting to use that same language for roommate situations. So if you live in the same suite, then all of a sudden you become a family unit and you can do things together. So that's another reason that I was sort of thinking about that language. So.
I know we're in a bit of a different situation because with art museums, I feel like it's a little bit easier to create that one-way flow. The Museum of Life and Science has 84 acres, and we are indoor and outdoor and have multiple buildings and lots of space for people to run around. And so I know that in the discussions of things that we've had with other zoos and like museums, it's a little bit more difficult to police people staying together in their family unit. And I know a lot of times we try to use the idea that we need to provide people that opportunity, but it's not our responsibility to make sure and enforce that. I don't know if that's the direction that we'll take here when we reopen, and it's possible that we could reopen and say, oh, we need to scratch everything we've just done and redo everything else. But, you know, because everything is so ever changing with this virus and with reopening phases too. So I know we are trying to be flexible with our people and with our guests and our visitors. But I'm not sure if there's that's a difficult topic to approach to try and find a way to make sure that people are identified as a family unit.
Sort of piggybacking on that idea, we talked a lot about sort of resource sharing in this call. Has anyone seen resources that they found to be especially helpful? I know for me, AAM, again, because we're a museum, they have some really great resources. One thing I'm specifically looking for are trainings that we can share with our staff, be it about how to handle PPE, how to de-escalate situations where someone maybe doesn't want to wear PPE, things like that. Has anyone seen any great trainings or resources for those types of things that we could share with our staff members?
Yes, there's this is Hillary again at the Greg. There's one from, I think it's Ohio. Let me see if I have that handy. It's this week. It's on a de-escalation training. Let me exit out of here and see. Hopefully I don't lose you in the connection. See what the name of it is. And Jennifer, chime in if you have that handy too. Let's see. Oh, I think it's actually in June.
Yes, it's in June. Give me 1 second.
Oh, here it is. It's on Tuesday, June 9th. It's a webinar called Best Practices in Conflict Resolution and De-Escalation. And maybe I could email that link to you, Dylan, to share it with the group or something.
That'd be great.
I know Jamie mentioned this, and I'm just starting to kind of look into it, but countonmenc.org is a really good resource. I found a lot of different things, and I'm anticipating that they'll probably add more resources there and more trainings, but it's definitely something that my boss suggested yesterday that I look into a little bit for potentially also having caterers take so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page together.
That is wonderful. And if it makes more sense, either everyone can send those resources to Lauren and I, and we can distribute them. If it becomes sort of a constant living thing, we'll probably create something like a Google Doc so we have a living document of those resources to share. Does anyone, so we're almost out of time. I want to be really conscious because I know a lot of us are on a lot of these webinars right now. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to pose to the group before we sort of talk about closing out this meeting?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to make the meeting tomorrow about private events, but just curious, does the recording go to everyone in this kind of group as well, even if you go or don't go?
Yes, absolutely. We will share that. And then I know, Jamie, those of us on this call who, there are many of us who are event professionals on this call as well who are not in the museum sector, who I think can bring some really great resources as well. So if we find that smaller groups or email communication is a good way to keep in touch, we'll make sure to include you on all of that.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all so much for your time today. I feel like we've generated a lot of helpful suggestions, even if we only walked away from this knowing that we are all kind of in the same boat where we're preparing to make a plan, or we have a plan but we haven't implemented it yet. That is so incredibly helpful. We will compile the resources we talked about and send those out. As we were just talking about, we have a session tomorrow that is going to be more event focused, and we hope to talk a lot about specific logistics, you know, not big ideas, more of how many people do you put at an 8-foot table, things like that. So please join us for that if you can. If you have other topics that you're interested in us discussing, please email Lauren and I. We are happy to set up those sessions as well. I think we are going to try maybe in the next week or so to have one that is specific to public programs. School groups might fit well into that as well. So, oops, I missed my slide with my great meme. This has been the thing that most of my staff has done such a good job of. They have great COVID memes. But this is the paperless post for that session tomorrow. You all should have all received it, but feel free to shoot me an email if you did not. My email address, I'll put in the chat really quickly, is acklandevents@unc.edu. So thank you guys so much for your time today. And I will hang out for another couple of minutes if there's anything specific you guys want to discuss.